Okay, hello YouTube. I was asked by one of my viewers to do a video, or I guess some videos probably it's going to be on the perk. So the perk happens after e4 d6, and generally speaking we consider kind of the mainline perk as something like after d4 knight f6 and then say knight c3 g6 is sort of the beginning of the perk. So if you like content like this and you want to see more of it, please go ahead and hit that subscribe button and click on your notification icon. So one of the things about the perk is it's actually a very difficult opening to prepare for white. In a sense, it's easy in the sense that you get to kind of pick your setup and you can play your setup against whatever they decide to do with their perk setup. But I kind of view it as like studying almost multiple openings because you can't play the perk exactly the same way depending on what setup they choose. And of course, there's a lot of crossover between the perk and the modern. The modern is definitely its own opening in its own right, and you need to have preparation against the modern as well. And the modern would simply be something like, say, d6, and then they're going to follow up with g6, or usually the modern goes from the move order g6 to begin with. But again, if you're playing g6 and d6 without knight f6, this is going to be, you're going to study this under the modern variation. You're not going to study this under the perk. And of course, white can also choose to play a King's Indian against, he can choose to make black's perk a King's Indian by simply playing f3 and c4. And this was an option I actually employed for years. I would just turn it into a King's Indian defense. I wasn't a d4 player, but I would play the King's Indian. I would play the same-ish against, basically, I would play the same-ish against the King's Indian if black decided to play a perk against my e4. So this is another option. So the first thing you have to decide as white is kind of what setup are you going to employ? And there's a lot of different setups that you can employ. You can simply bring your knights out to f3 and c3 if you'd like. This is what they used to do back in the early 1900s, pretty much all the time. And of course, I still know a lot of Scholastic players. This is just what they do. And there's nothing wrong with this. You can take other setups, like the most aggressive setup really is something like the Austrian Attack. This is my personal preference because, I grew up reading books like My 60 Memorable Games, and of course this was, Fischer's choice. And of course you can choose setups like you can play f3, which was famous. Kasparov had Kasparov's Immortal game in this line against Vasil Topalov. Of course that was more in kind of a modern variation as opposed to a perk, but you can, again, there's a lot of crossover here. So let's just talk about the mainline perk, and let's just talk about one setup that we're going to try to employ against the mainline perk. Let's talk about the Austrian Attack. So the Austrian Attack was, of course, Fischer's favorite, and it's a very aggressive system. We're trying to play f4, and we're trying to play e5, and if we succeed in playing f4 and e5, we're going to have a super, super strong position in the middle of the board. But there's a lot of things that we have to do before we get in the move e5. Mainly, we're going to have to play moves like knight f3 and bishop d3, so that when we do play e5, we're not going to be exchanging queens. So an example would be like, say, bishop g7. We're going to play knight f3, and now there's a couple of main lines here. The two main lines here are going to be c5 right away, poking at the center before we get a chance to play e5. And then the other main line is going to be castle's kingside, in which case white plays bishop d3, and he's going to prep the move pawn to e5. So now, if black plays anything lackadaisical at this point, like if he plays just random moves, like if he plays even just, say knight c6, or another move that's kind of a lemon here is a move like, say, c5, we're going to reinforce this e5 idea. So like after dc5, e5, these positions should generally be considered anywhere between slight edge to major advantage white. The whole point is once we get in e5 and f4 and we're blocking off this bishop, we're doing something really special in chess. We're doing what we call cutting the board in half. And this is the idea of the Austrian Attack, is we want to play pawn to f4 followed by pawn to e5, and we want to effectively cut that board in half. What we're doing is we're preventing this half of the board for black from helping this other half of the board, this half over here where the king is. So we're basically saying, okay, anything that's on black's king side is going to stay on black's king side, and anything that's on black's queen side is going to have a very difficult time getting over to the king side. So to give you an example, I had kind of a fun game in this line. Continued knight d5, knight takes d5, queen takes d5, and then queen e2. And of course, all these moves are relatively normal, nothing weird here. So there's been a couple of attempts here. Bishop f5 was a pretty reasonable temp in Aronian versus Fiddler, but of course Aronian was actually much, much better in this game and should have won. And actually the way he played it was fine. He played bishop takes f5, gf5, he castled, and all of these moves were fine. Nothing wrong here. White's still maintaining a pretty solid advantage here. As you can see, these pieces are just kind of out of the game on a kind of permanent level. But after a few more moves, Aronian just started playing some kind of second-best moves. Here he exchanged rooks and gave up the file for reasons that are unclear. I think he just thought that he was better and he could do just about anything and win. If he just exchanged material, eventually black would be left with this dark squared bishop and, he'd be effectively up a piece. But he's much better off just playing something like e6. And then after f6, which is basically forced, there's not another move. You don't have a free move with your bishop when I'm threatening e takes f7. So f6, knight f7, and then say knight d4, we would simply exchange off black's only two active pieces, and then rook d8, and all of these pieces on black's king side are completely frozen, and white would be completely winning. So that was really the best way for Aronian to just kind of polish off this game, just play something like e6. But even after what he played, he should have been better, but just a few questionable moves later, he somehow managed to get in trouble. Like after here, takes, and okay, like white's still better if he just, exchanges queens and plays something simple. He's got a slight edge in this endgame. But instead, he played queen d1, gave up his pawn on a2, and then black ended up actually winning. So it was kind of a disaster. But the opening was great. We should definitely emulate what he did in the opening. White had a major advantage for the majority of the game. So bishop f5 is an option. Another thing that gets played a lot is maybe bishop g4. And then we should just play something like bishop e4, queen d7, bishop e3, and okay, white's just a ton better here. And it's actually, white can do something very similar to what I did in the game I'm about to show you, but white's just a ton better here. That's basically all you need to know. I had a game go knight c6, and this is another pretty common move. Bishop e4, queen d7, and I didn't... okay, so bishop e3 is probably the best move, b6, and then here I didn't necessarily play the best move. Like, I played rook d1, which I guess is okay, but what's interesting is the computer recommends that I could have just started with my idea immediately. In positions like this, where I've effectively cut the board in half, I like kind of utilizing as many pieces as I can to get involved in an attack against this king. Because at this point, black can't bring his entire queen side to defend his king. So he's basically down these four pieces. So I shouldn't actually care too much about whether or not this rook gets involved, because I have more than enough pieces to win the game over here on the king side with, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 pieces, and black is going to only have 2 pieces to defend. So I'm outnumbering him by 3 pieces, and there's no way he's going to get any of these pieces to his king side, let alone the 3 out of the 4 that he needs to actually defend the position. So really, white should just undertake operations right away and should just play h4. And according to the computer, this has just made decisive advantage white immediately, just h4. So rook d1 was really just pointless. Getting the rook to the open file doesn't seem to help anything. And then queen c7, I played knight g5, e6, and then I conducted my idea anyway with h4. And what's interesting enough is the computer again recommends that I undertake an attack with slightly less material and just get a decisive advantage. Like, now I don't even need the rook on h1. I could have just played queen f3, bishop b7, and then queen h3, threatening mate, and then after h6, bishop takes g6 is winning, apparently. So the whole point is after gf6, queen h3. So now since I've got the rook on d1, I don't need the rook on h1 anymore. So I don't need one of these rooks. And I kept thinking I needed both of them. But here I would have rook d7 totally winning, is just coming, and there's no stopping that. So for example, even if they block, like, say, rook f7, the whole point is we can just exchange everything on f7, and then rook d7 comes, and white's up a mountain of material, plus he's still, cutting off the center. So in the game actually was a very pretty finish for me. I played h4, h5, so I was fortunate that my opponent didn't do anything serious to try to preempt this plan, although it's not clear that he had anything serious that could have preempted this plan. White has just got a huge advantage here. And then after hg6, I played queen f3. The idea is, of course, to get my queen to the open file with tempo. bishop takes e4, and I have no intention of recapturing. The move that I intended was the move that I played. I played rook h8, and then my opponent immediately resigned. The whole point of rook h8 is no matter how he captures it, white has checkmate. So if, the obvious king h8, we have queen h3, queen h7 mate. That much is pretty straightforward. And if bishop h8, still queen h3, threat is queen h7 mate, and there's no good way to stop it. If bishop g7, queen h7 is mate. If the rook moves, we have simply queen h7 followed by queen f7 mate. So this is just winning no matter what. So my opponent actually, right after rook h8, he kind of resigned off on the spot. But I use this game as kind of a template of how to respond to these situations where black kind of plays this early c5 when he's not supposed to, and you just take, and play e5, or even just situations where something similar happens, like where he can play, if we go all the way back to this, you would employ a very similar strategy against something like knight c6. You would just play e5 right away, and you would end up with a very similar position. E5 to e5 to e5, and you would essentially start leveraging the same type of plan, where you're going to play this early h4, h5, and you're just going to take advantage of the fact that the board is cut in half, and black can't bring his queen side to defend his king side, so white should just have a decisive attack on the king side. So another game where that kind of famously happened, and what kind of motivated me, to find these refutations in my own games, was this very famous Bobby Fischer game, which went castles, bishop d3, and of course bishop g4. This was played by Banco, and that game continued h3, bishop f3, queen f3, and then knight c6, bishop e3, e5. And after d takes e5, f5, Pal Banco essentially had the same problem. These three pieces could never get over to the king side to help defend. And Fischer just showed this quickly and brutally in his game. So the game continued gf5, queen f5, knight d4, queen f2. Knight came back to e8, and then we just had simple castles king side. And as you can see, all of Fischer's pieces are going to start participating in this attack against the black king. After knight d6, we have queen g3. The threats are starting to become pretty obvious. He's just threatening something like, say, bishop h6, followed by queen g7 mate. So we have to do something. King h8, we have queen g4, c6, queen h5, queen e8, and now bishop takes d4, e takes d4, rook f6. And the idea is he wants to play the move e5 with the threat of queen h7 mate, but before he can get away with it, he has to prevent black from trying to block anything with the move f5. So he plays this very pretty rook f6. The whole point is now, if takes, we play e5, and there is no defense against this threat, queen h7 mate, because now the queen and the bishop are threatening mate, and there's just no way to defend. So that was the point of rook f6, and rook f6, basically the game is over, but a few more moves got played. King g8, e5 still gets played, it's still the same idea, h6, and then knight e2, and Banco resigns. Fischer has a winning attack, and there's just no way to stop it. Okay, so that's the stem game of how we deal with that, and those are some of the basic ideas on how to handle the mainline pirc, where we're trying to reinforce this idea of pawn to e5. I'm going to be doing a few more videos on the pirc. I'm going to be going over some early attempts to play like an early c5, and I'm going to be going over a lot of other variations. Something that you got to keep in mind with the pirc is you don't have a catch-all solution. There are a lot of different setups that black can employ. There's a lot of different move orders, and there's a lot of different systems that black can use. There's no one kind of catch-all approach. But this is the basic idea of how to play the pirc, the Austrian attack with white, trying to reinforce this e5 idea, trying to cut that board in half, and trying to get the attack on the king side. And this is something that we're going to be shooting for in every kind of line, no matter what variation black chooses to play. So anyways, I hope you found this video helpful. I hope you learned something new about chess, and I hope you can use some of these ideas in your own game. Thank you very much for watching.